I'm Lior Sternfeld. I'm an assistant professor of history and Jewish studies at Penn State University. I am a historian, social historian of the modern Middle East, and I study Iran and Jewish histories of the Middle East.
Thank you so much for joining us, Lior. And it's really great to have you. I love your background. It's amazing.
Thank you.
It's very nice and
That's
bright
the
in
closest I
Tehran
can
today.
get to Tehran.
It's lovely. And thank you so much for joining us today. And I'm very excited to talk a little bit about your book, Between Iran and Zion, Jewish Histories of 20th Century Iran. I think it's an amazing book and a great title and great topic. I've just finished reading the introduction and I'm really enjoying it so far. Extremely readable, very accessible. So just to start off, maybe we can talk about why you decided to write this book in the first place.
So I decided to write this book. As you know, the decision is made when you're in grad school, um, and it it was, development of my PhD dissertation.
Mhm.
Um, and when I started my PhD program, I had many ideas. None of them was related to Jews in Iran
Hmm.
or anything in this area. I was going to write something on the Jebehei Meli, on Musaddiq,
Ah.
which is something that I was fascinated with, and I wrote my master thesis on Musaddiq.
Mm.
So and then I took courses at UT Austin. This is where I got my PhD from, and I was set to start working on my comps. And in my very last seminar
Mhm.
in grad school, I took a class with my advisor on revolutionary ideologies in Iran, and I decided just to get it out of my system to write one
Mm.
paper on Iranian Jews. And
Oh, wow.
if you're familiar at all with the historiography of the revolution, you know that there are books on women in the revolution, on students in the revolution, on the Armenians in the revolution,
Mhm,
on
mhm.
Bazaris, on every and any
Everyone.
Iranian society, but there was nothing on the Jewish community.
Yes, true.
And I said, knowing Jewish history from other places, it's impossible that 100,000 Jews were just invisible during this period. They were
Yes,
either on
true.
the Shah side or the revolution side or both, but it's
Hmm.
impossible that
Yeah,
they are just not there.
true. Yes.
And I decided to write this paper, and it's chapter 4 of my book.
Ah, okay, good.
And I came across this fantastic
Mm.
story of the Jewish hospital in Iran, in Tehran during the revolution,
Mm.
that became that they ran this operation of rescuing protesters from the demonstrations against the Shah,
I see.
and it was together with Ayatollah Talabani,
Wow.
and I thought that it's just amazing story, and I
Mm.
could not believe that it had not been told.
Mm. Yeah, that's
And
true.
I
Interesting.
thanks. And so this seminar paper turned into my article in Iranian studies on um, the revolution's forgotten sons and daughters,
Oh,
and
okay.
um, and then I realized that my dissertation is going to be on the Jewish Iranian experience of the 20th century.
No, that's amazing. What a
Um,
journey. Because you didn't start from there. It's incredible.
yeah, it was a journey because also I came from I studied Jewish history in undergrad,
Hmm.
and I can't say that it was. I mean, the state of scholarship on
Mm.
Jewish history uh, in, let's say, I went to undergrad almost 20 years ago,
Mm.
and when you came to studied Jewish history of the Middle East,
Mm-hmm.
there was there were few good works,
Wow.
but most of the scholarship that was published until 20, 15 years ago, it was just part of this school of thought that there is no Jewish existence
Mm.
in places other than Israel, especially not in Middle Eastern countries.
Right. And you say this in your introduction, I think.
Right.
You mentioned this quite a bit, and that fascinated me. I didn't know that that was
And
the thinking.
yeah, and when you come to Iran, it's even worse because in the
Mm.
Arab countries, I think that enough time had passed for second and third generation of Jewish immigrants from the Arab
Mm-hmm.
countries could deal with their community trauma in a way that is productive for scholarship. In
Right.
Iran, because Jewish life in Iran continued uninterruptedly until 1979,
Mm-hmm.
uh, we missed this generational development.
Right. I see.
And so, as I say in my introduction, when I went to school, to undergrad, and then in graduate school, the only historical text that we had on Iranian Jews was Habib Levy's book that was written in 1961.
Wow.
And
That's okay. Quite old. Yes.
yeah,
Do you think that's changing now? I mean, with your book and with recent scholarship, is that
absolutely.
changing? That's great.
Yeah. There are phenomenal works that are being written right now. There are dissertations and
Mm.
articles, and the field is growing. Uh,
Mm.
and it's fun to see the different directions that people take, that young scholars,
Mm.
students in the course of their PhD studies, they discover new aspects of it, and it's also
Mm.
discovering new archives and new ways to deal with the travel restrictions and so on.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yes.
it's fun. Yeah, the field is
It's
growing,
quite fun.
and my book is definitely not going to be the only book of future students.
But I think it's a very important book because for a lot of us who know that the Jews in Iran is the largest community of Jews in the Middle East outside of Israel. We know that, but we don't know much beyond that. So it's important to have your book to kind of to base us in history a little bit. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that I try to escape the notion of meta narratives, and this is why I
Mm,
also titled the book "Jewish Histories of 20th Century
right.
Iran," because
Yeah.
there's not one narrative that one size
Mm,
fits all.
that's true.
And
That's true.
and what I wanted to do, I wanted this book because of its, because of the state of scholarship. I wanted this book to be the beginning of conversation and not the end of
Hmm.
it.
No, no.
Um,
That's a nice way
and
to put it.
thank you.
Mm. Yeah. And what was the research journey like? I mean, I read a little bit that you relied on interviews, and what was it easy to find people to talk? What were your archival materials?
So, in terms of research and methodology, this book is hybrid model
Oh,
of
the best kind.
um, I did use oral histories quite a bit.
Hmm.
I interviewed uh, as many people that I could find that were relevant to my research.
Hmm.
And I interviewed them in three continents. So
Wow.
in the US,
Hmm.
in Europe, and
Hmm.
in the Middle East, in Israel, and in
Mm.
Iran via Skype and so on.
Hmm. Of course. Yeah.
Um, and but oral history is a tricky discipline, and
Mm.
I'm grateful to few major figures in the field of oral history that helped me and guided me through this process.
Mm.
Um, but my decision was that no part of the of the interviews going to be used unless I can corroborate it with other documents.
Sure, of course.
So
Yeah.
when people, when my interviewees mentioned something that I thought was important for the book,
Mhm.
and I needed documents, I asked them to guide me. Like,
Yeah,
can you remember the date so I can find in the newspapers, or do you have
sure.
any kind of letter or documents?
Hmm.
And so you will see in the book that almost everything that is mentioned mentioned in interviews is backed by hard evidence that
Mm.
I gathered from their own archives or in public materials.
Mm.
Um,
Right.
Other than that, there are a few libraries in the US that are well equipped with Iranian Jewish materials.
Mm.
First and foremost, the UCLA library,
Okay.
where I spent more than a few hours, uh, and Harvard Library.
Hmm.
U. Austin was kind enough to purchase collections that I needed.
Nice. Okay.
And then my current home institution, Penn State,
Hmm.
acquired the collections of Jewish publications in Iran in the late 20th century and early
Hmm.
21st century. Um, I also friends and research assistants that had
Mm.
access to archives and libraries in Iran
Mm.
helped me to reach the Library of Congress of the
Hmm.
Majlis um,
Wow.
in Iran, and they kept pretty much all the Jewish newspapers from the 1940s
Wow.
onwards, and also the National Library of Israel that had
Hmm.
a pretty impressive collection of Jewish letters and publications.
Hmm. Incredible. But you're like a detective going through all this material, but that's amazing.
Aren't we all?
Yeah, Andrew, I think we all want to be detectives, Indiana Jones. And what were the main surprises for you when you were writing this book? What struck
The
you?
main surprises. So first of all, the life-changing surprise was that the kind of involvement that I discovered of Jews in the 1979 revolution,
Mm.
which made me rethink about not just their history, but also the way that they tell their history. The self-narration of Iranian Jewish history.
Mm.
Um, I became very fascinated with the gap between personal narratives and community narratives.
Mhm.
And this is
Right.
something that I touch on in few places in the book, that there are the community narratives, which are the
Right.
right things to say
Okay.
of
Yeah.
what was the Jewish experience.
Mhm.
And then, so for example, many people will tell you about, discrimination or
Mhm.
anti-Semitism. And then, you question and you push it a little bit and you say, can you tell me about your experience with that? And then sometimes they'll have something. Sometimes they said, no, it didn't happen to me, but I know
Right.
of people.
Right. Right.
And this
So
is
this
the gap that,
community. Yeah.
yeah, and this is the gap
Right.
that fascinated me.
Ah, interesting.
And
And would this
so
be for the community in Iran, or would this be uh,
outside
elsewhere,
Iran,
outside
yeah,
Iran? Mm.
it's a diasporic memory.
Interesting. Mm.
So this was something that I, in every step of the research, I found it fascinating to see what people
Mm.
remember in their own experience and what they
Right.
adopt as memory from the community.
It's very, very interesting, actually. Yeah, it's
Thanks.
quite painstaking work to sort of like see the two together.
Yeah, and I think that
Mm.
I'm going to pay more attention to it in my next book because,
Oh, okay.
yeah, because I think that it can fuel one more research.
No, definitely. No, it's actually very interesting, especially when it comes to memory studies and how we remember certain things as a community and as individuals. We've talked a little bit about your contribution, the book's contribution to scholarship, but do you have any other hopes for the book and where you might see it, its position in the field?
um, I don't want it to be exclusively academic book. I don't want it to be read only by academics. And I
Mm,
think that for the most part I achieved it. The book was
yeah.
published
Mm,
2 years ago, and
mm-hmm,
I've given many talks around the world,
mm-hmm,
uh, and I get to see Iranian Jews everywhere
mm,
respond to my book, and they are not academics, or not
mm.
academic research is not their main
Right,
uh, occupation. So
right, right. That's rewarding, isn't it?
it is, it
Yeah.
is,
Mm.
yeah. So I just want it to be, to be something that, again, a conversation starter.
Yeah, definitely. I think so. And from what I've read so far, it's great because it's definitely written with an academic's sensibilities, but to a wide audience. So even someone like me who is is a PhD student and can be considered an academic, but I don't know this field very much, and I don't know the history of Jews in Iran. So it's very accessible. So I think you've achieved that.
Thank
And
you.
sort of to end a little bit,
And if
and
Netflix want to adapt it to
yeah.
I don't know, Netflix series or something, I'm more than welcome.
I hope someone's hearing this. That's good. And sort of to as a way to end, maybe we can talk about your next project a little bit. And so you mentioned a little bit about the diaspora community
So my
project.
next project, I'm working on two projects simultaneously and see which one
Wow,
I'm
well
best.
done.
It's the
That's good.
history of the Jewish Iranian communities in the U.S. and Israel. So the diaspora
Right.
communities of Iranian Jews,
Hmm.
and it comes from, it's actually something that I started thinking of when during my book talks,
Right.
because of the responses that I get from Iranian Jews that want to tell their story.
Mm,
And I think that these stories and the Iranian Jewish community in the U.S., in Israel, deserve to have, um,
mm,
you know, more than one way to tell their story or the
sure.
community story.
Sure. Definitely. And that's good. That's very exciting, and I think look forward to hearing more about that as you go along. But
Thank
Lior,
you.
thank you so very much for your time today, and I really appreciate you talking to me and going through your book and the journey.
Thank you
I
for
really
hosting me.
appreciate it.
Thank you.